can always expect Andrea with her interests to have something interesting going on. And she's also a good propagator, which means that if you treat her right, she'll show you around to the area where she's propagating things for sale. And with that, I'll turn her over. I'll turn over to her.
I don't think your husband would appreciate it.
It's entirely too early for that, Jim. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited to be connected back with my Maryland and Virginia people. And so thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that introduction, Jim. So tonight, I want to take you all on a journey of some of my favorite plants month by month. So as Jim said, I live, work, and garden in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I do that in two very different gardens. One is my home garden, which is 2 acres, about 12 miles from Center City. And the other is Elizabeth Lawrence's garden, which is about 1/3 of an acre. That's about 3 miles from Center City. And you couldn't have, well, you could have 2 more different properties, but it's really interesting to notice the differences between the two. So I've noticed that my personal home garden is sometimes as much as 5 degrees cooler than Elizabeth's. And of course, the soil's quite different. Elizabeth's is very quickly draining, whereas mine in some places is lovely loam, but in other places, really solid red clay. We're considered zone 8A, although certain pockets in Elizabeth's garden act really more like zone 9. I think all the plants that we'll see tonight will be hardy for you guys, although you never really know what a plant is going to do for you until you give it a proper go. And Jim and Dan know more about that than probably anybody that I know of. So let's see if I can make this advance. Hello, screen. Here we go. Before we dig in, I thought it might be fun to see my office, Elizabeth Lawrence's garden, through the course of 1 year. So this garden for her was a testing ground for plants from all over the world. She wanted to see what would grow well here for us in the Middle South. And these photos are ones that I've taken for each, I took them for each month in the 2022. And as she wrote, each season is new and different from all those that went before. And all I can say is, indeed, like, this is the best place to work. I'm the luckiest kid in the world because it's very intensively planted and it's got a lot of cool plants in it. And yeah, so, okay, so let's get cracking. Let's go to, we'll start the calendar year in January. We're starting it right here in front of Elizabeth Lawrence's house with Hamamelis mollis Whistly Supreme. Now, I personally, full disclosure, I personally have never succeeded in growing witch hazels of any kind in my home garden. So I was really super, super cautious when planting a new Chinese witch hazel to replace Elizabeth's original one in her garden. So as I planted it, I hoped like heck it wouldn't go the way of all the others in my life. And there was no pressure at all, considering this was one of Elizabeth's favorite large shrubs. Well, I'm here to tell you that I haven't killed it yet. Yay! As a matter of fact, it has grown amazingly well. And I consider Whistly Supreme a first-rate Chinese witch hazel, probably my all-time favorite of any type, and that's not only because that's the only one I've been able to grow, but most of the year you'll enjoy these large, handsome apple green leaves. They're a little bit rough and kind of fuzzy. It has a vase-shaped form and really amazing fall color. And starting in October, there's a smattering of, it's a smattering of bloom in October, but really the real show comes in January when it covers itself with these cheerful, wonderfully fragrant blooms. It's really quite a handsome thing, and it's required precious little thank goodness, other than good drainage, some occasional light pruning to keep those branches from crossing and rubbing on one another. Keep it watered in times of prolonged drought, and it's on the south side of Elizabeth's house, but it takes nicely to part sun as well. So then we'll go into February. I chose this woody deciduous shrub, Prunus humilis, that for decades was said to be a flowering almond. And I watched it and I studied it for a few years, and I decided that I didn't agree with that identification. Don't ever trust a plant tag. Don't ever, trust a label on anything. So I dove into Elizabeth's research until I found what I was looking for. And you guys might think this is crazy, but this is the kind of stuff that I really geek out on in my job. It's stuff like this. So this is one of Elizabeth Lawrence's original index cards, and it's the card for this plant. Now I've named the plant Caroline Dorman because that's from whom she got it. And Caroline found it in an old nursery in Louisiana. And when I dove into Elizabeth's research and I found this index card, I found what I was looking for. Its true identity, because she and Caroline actually had correspondence back and forth about what the heck is this thing. She didn't, at first she thought it was a dwarf Russian almond, but then no, it really wasn't. So it turned out to be a Prunus humilis, which is the Chinese dwarf cherry. So starting in mid to late February, these small apple blossom type flowers begin to open just before or just as the leaves appear. And the blooms continue to open in succession for about a month, if you're lucky. Now this year we had, oh my God, we've had the craziest winter. I'm sure you guys have too. So when this was starting to bloom, all of a sudden we had this like out of nowhere 80 something degrees. And so it was like a week and a half that this was like one and done. But at any rate, usually it's almost a month that this blooms in succession, and they finish up blooming just as the shrub is fully clothed in leaves. It's a favorite of bees, and thankfully so, because by early June, fruits about the size of a dime create the next show of this plant. And I never seem to notice I never seem to notice the berries before they turn red. They do attract birds and at least one curious human, this curious human. The fruit is edible, but there's really not much meat there. It's mostly pit, so I just really don't recommend it. There is kind of decent-ish fall color. It's not super great, but it's there nonetheless. And there's a smattering of bloom on it in the fall, and there's a scant flower here or there. And I've actually seen a flower on it, or more than one flower on it, in December. It tops out at about 5 feet tall and spreads to about 6 feet. Whoops, let me go back. Oh my goodness, now I'm gonna have to bounce back through this. Okay. Forgive me. There we go. Let's see, where was I? All right. So yeah, it's about 5 feet wide, or sorry, about 5 feet tall by 6 feet wide. And that's the size of this one that's been in front of Elizabeth's house since 1957. It's in a sunny spot on the south side of her house in clay soil, although it's not heavy clay. Unfortunately, I don't know of a source for this currently, other than a future Winghaven plant sale. Probably next spring will be my first offering of it, if I can tease out a few suckers. I've had only a handful of seedlings over the years, and all of those have come true. So that's kind of cool and exciting. Okay, there's our fall picture. All right, Andrea, there. Okay, now we're in March. So for March, I have a couple of plants that I really adore. First up is this teeny tiny, adorable daffodil. This is one of the cutest little bulbs I've ever grown or known. And I'm so glad I ordered it from Odyssey Bulbs and planted it in Elizabeth's rock garden. The first one opened on March 10th of the following year from the fall that I planted it. and it seemed like it stayed in bloom for a super long time. And I have in my notes that I feel like it was in bloom for like 4 weeks, maybe longer. But now I'm wondering if it seemed like so long because I went out every single day and made a point of saying hello to them because they made me smile and brighten my day. And when I say little bulb, I'm really not kidding. Like, it's so tiny, it's stupid. They top out at 4 inches, so they won't rock the world of any estate-sized garden. But given a choice spot with some sun and some good drainage where they can be appreciated in all their tiny splendor, these guys are absolute perfection. They're best grown in a humus-rich, free-draining soil in a lightly shaded spot in the garden, although they're growing in full sun here, which is fine. They're fine there. They're incredibly hardy bulbs that can tolerate all but very waterlogged positions. It's unfortunate that this is rarely available. And I was checking through my list of sources and I didn't find any for right now. But if you ever run across it, be sure to get it. So this is Narcissus asturiensis waver tree. So my other March love is this azalea. And I call it a shredded azalea. This is a rhododendron Karomo shikibu. I actually kind of love it just for the name because it's like, so, you know, martial arts, like Karomo shikibu, like I'm going to take you out if you put me in your garden. I do so love azaleas, but I have to say this is one of my all-time favorites. For you guys up there, Karomo shikibu might be semi-deciduous, but for me it's evergreen. And it blooms throughout March and into April, and sometimes it even blooms into May. I've even had sporadic blooms on it throughout the summer and the fall. It wants to grow to about 5 feet tall, probably 6 feet wide if you let it get that big, but I have to admit, I keep mine pruned to about 3.5 feet tall, and it really seems no worse for the wear. One thing I have learned fairly recently that, you know, we're always learning as gardeners. And that's one of my favorite things about gardening is that there's always more to learn. And maybe I shouldn't admit that I recently learned this, but whatever, I'm totally putting it out there. So I recently learned that keeping azaleas well watered through the fall is essential for having good bloom the following spring. And it totally makes sense. I should have known that already because fall's the time when they're setting their blooms for the coming year. But I have to say that when I ran across that, it was probably maybe about a year ago that I ran across that in some of Elizabeth Lawrence's writings. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Now I've been wondering why some of my azaleas didn't bloom very well. Look, that's why. And so this year I made sure last fall, I made sure to keep everybody well watered. And it's been a good azalea year in both gardens so far. So in Elizabeth's garden, April and May are the months of irises. And people, I know there are a blue million bazillion things that bloom in April and May that I could talk about. But in putting this talk together, I had to like distill stuff way down and really, you know, dig through and pick out the things that I thought would be exciting. So for you all, for now, right now, April, May, the month of irises, and I've come to love so many of them. And that's mostly thanks to Elizabeth. There's so many different kinds that we can grow, but one that I really have come to know and love is Iris graminia, the plum-scented iris. And that's the one I want to share with you today. Comparatively speaking, it's really kind of small. Foliage gets to maybe 12 inches, maybe 14. Flowers, the stems are maybe 8 inches, if that. Here in Elizabeth's garden, it blooms in a bit of shade, and there's also a patch in full sun. I've actually have found that the patch that's in a little bit of shade does better than the one that's in full sun. And I have to say, yes, the flowers do actually smell like plums. This is one of my favorites because it's so striking. From bud, I mean, look at that. Look at those buds. The colors really awesome. It's almost seems saturated and wonderful. So from bud to perfection of flower, and even to the flowers that have gone over, all stages of this to me are so lovely that I don't even care that it blooms kind of down in the foliage. It increases nicely here in Elizabeth's garden, and it grows in both spots, in full sun and in the area where it's in a little bit of shade. They're both well-drained, loamy soil, and they both get a good summer baking, which I find that this appreciates. All right, so end of May and into June finds this lovely small tree that extends the dogwood season. This tree is really beautiful in all seasons, as it's evergreen for us here. And this is Cornus angustata, or I guess now it's going by elliptica. Ellsbury is the cultivar name. Empress of China is the trade name. And we don't even want to get started on me talking about cultivar name versus trade name. So I put both here just so you all know. I could get on a soapbox about that. I won't. But okay, let's get back to this beautiful tree. So this blooms a good bit later, obviously, than our native dogwood, which is blooming right now for us. And the specimen that is planted here in Elizabeth's garden, which that's a picture of, it comes into full bloom from late May to mid-June. Blooms seem like they last a really, really long time because those bracts, they start out green, and then they start to expand and they start to sort of open up and unfurl, and they change from that sort of limey green, and here it is on the far right of the picture, to an ivory, and then finally to a pure white when they're all the way opened out. And then the bracts all fall to the ground. And it takes probably, gosh, I would safely say it takes at least 4 to 6 weeks for this entire process, if not longer, for this entire process to come to fruition. And I said come to fruition. That's kind of fun, because the next stage of it is these dusty red fruits that follow usually in mid to late fall. Now, this tree can get up to about 18 feet tall by 10 to 15 feet wide, although the one here is quite a bit narrower than that. And I've read some descriptions about this tree that warn against planting it in afternoon sun. But I have to say, don't ever trust anybody until you grow it for yourself or you see it with your own eyes, because the first place that I ever saw this tree was at the Bartlett Arboretum here in Charlotte. And it was planted out in the middle of a wide open field of lawn with not one speck of shade in sight. And it was absolutely breathtaking. I couldn't get enough of it. And I was so pleased to find that a specimen of this had been planted here in Elizabeth's garden when I came to work here. Okay, so we're going into the month of July. Month of July is the month I begin to look for flowers of the hardy cyclamen. I'd never grown this plant until I started working here. And this is Cyclamen heterofolium, and I love what Elizabeth had to say about them. And she writes, gardeners who begin with tubers the size of quarters will have to possess their souls in patience. And then in 40 years, they can expect more than 500 blooms from a single corm. The frail elegance of these tiny flowers makes waiting worthwhile. And the hardy cyclamen bloom when bloom is most welcome, summer and fall and late winter, and where bloom is most needed, in shady places beneath trees. Now, at the moment, the ones here in the garden and in my home garden are in full foliar glory. I find that they're almost more decorative in leaf than in flower, as the leaves are so variable in color and in pattern. I loved, there's even a, full silver leafed one. There are narrow leaved ones and wide leafed ones. And I mean, it's amazing. So after they bloom, oh, sorry, I should have said that here in her garden, they begin blooming in July. They continue into August, September, and October, and I've even seen flowers on them in mid-December. And after they bloom, the seed pods begin to form. And as they do, the stems do this really cool coil. They coil like springs around those seed pods, and they get tighter and tighter and more compact. And they pull the seed pods as they coil around, they pull the seed pods closer and closer down to the ground, to the corm, until they're almost held flat to the ground. And I've read that as the seed pods ripen and they mature and they open, ants go after some sort of sugary substance that's held within those seed pods. And sometimes you can trace the path back to an ant's abode by the seeds of the cyclamen seedlings that they drop the seeds along the way. So that's kind of fun. I always love seeing these, the springs. I have found that cyclamen heterofolium sets seeds pretty prolifically. And I've transplanted seedlings in my home garden and also here in Elizabeth's garden when they're about 3 to 4 years old. And I've had really good success with that. So you can make a decent sized patch in 10 years, if not sooner. So you don't have to wait maybe the whole 40 years, but I think what she was talking about was, from one corm having the 500 blooms. I have not counted the blooms on some of her corms. That her original corms are still here, some of them. But maybe I'll have to do that this year to see if I'm getting 500 or not. But these are just dead easy to grow. I don't know why these aren't more readily available to gardeners all over. I mean, they're the perfect sort of thing to place at the base of deciduous trees. Just give them good drainage and not too awful much water. Like they don't want to drown in water because then they'll tend to rot. But gosh, they've been really, really easily grown for me. And that's something I very much enjoy about a plant, if it's easily grown without a whole lot of fuss. So now we're into August. August is a tough month in the South for both the garden and for the gardener. So that's why when I first met this lovely autumn squill that really it blooms in summer, not in autumn, I knew we'd be fast friends. I know it as Barnardia japonica. It also goes by the name Scilla chinensis or Scilla scilloides. The names are all synonymous, but I think that for now, the taxonomists have gone back to Barnardia japonica. But no matter the name, this mid-August bloomer is on my top 10 list of favorite bulbs ever. And I'd venture to say that I'd perhaps put it in my top 5. These are also dead easy to grow. They have grown and bloomed for me in places in full sun, in almost full shade, from dry spots to moist spots, from fairly heavy clay to sandy loam. And the honeybees love them. And they can be tucked into so many different little places. The only drawback that I know is that they seem to be adored by some critter in my home garden. It's probably bunnies. I'm hoping it's not my dogs. But if it is, hey, okay, that's fine. But I'm thinking it's probably bunnies. But here in Elizabeth's garden, even though there are bunnies here, they don't seem to be bothered at all. So that's nice. They do spread nicely by seed. And perhaps in a garden that's small, that might be something that is a drawback as well, because sometimes they can spread a bit too nicely by seed. But they also enjoy being divided. So that's something that I do every other year or so. And here's a bucket. I mean, that's actually from Lindy's garden. Thank you, Lindy. This is a picture I took after I dug divided some from her plants that she has there. But they do take well to being divided. So every other year or so, there are more that you can have more to share. All they ask is decent drainage. So really they're perfect for the rock garden. Stems top out at about 14 inches. Leaves come up in the late winter, and then they die away at the beginning of the summer. And then in mid-August or so, then these flowers pop up, and then the leaves begin to come up as the flowers come up. And God, they're just so awesome and so much fun. So the month of September, that finds me beginning to search between, under the leaves that are beginning to fall for autumn crocus. And I have to admit that I bought this crocus, Crocus salzmanii erectophyllus, because I'd never heard of it before. And I thought this might be something fun that Elizabeth Lawrence would like in her garden. And B, because I'm forever 12 and my inner 12-year-old giggled at the cultivar name. I mean, I'm just in full disclosure there. I'm just laying it out for you. So, well, all of that made me want to buy it. But also when I read the cultivation notes, I thought, hey, I might have some success with this. Because this crocus has required nothing except sharp drainage. And I've tucked them into a corner of a step above Elizabeth Lawrence's pool here in her garden. The soil is really pretty rocky there, and they're in full sun when they most need it, which is in the winter. Their foliage is up and photosynthesizing from late fall all the way through into the spring. So when their foliage is up, there's a deciduous magnolia overhead, and of course the leaves are gone in the wintertime. So it's kind of a perfect spot for them. This crocus pops out of the ground so suddenly in late September or early October, and then it opens its flowers in late October into early November. And it's so nice to have such an early start to the crocus season. I love, like Elizabeth, I love stretching the season from one end to the next on bulbs especially. And when these come up, they're such a wonderful, unexpected surprise that it's like this little automatic present that reminds me that fall is here. So for October, I've chosen one of my very favorite camellias, the Camellia salionensis. This is one of my favorites because it usually blooms from October all the way through into March, except for this year. This year we dipped down to 10 degrees at Christmas, and that put a sudden end to all but, I'd say maybe a handful of flowers. But this is the first time in the 12 and a half years that I've worked here that has happened. I also love this camellia because it's such a subtle and delicate beauty. The flowers are single and they're only about 2 to 3 inches across, about 3 inches. But the flowers are sturdier than most camellia flowers. The petals are almost a little waxy. They're thicker. And when the flowers drop, they drop whole, which I also really, really like because they stay fresh for a couple days or longer on the ground. So it's like this smattering of, we're still blooming, and it's just fun to see that on the ground. And in an article that Elizabeth wrote for the Charlotte Observer in January of 1971, she wrote about this camellia. In the 6 years that Camellia salionensis has been in my garden, it has bloomed earlier and earlier. At first, soon after the new year, then before Christmas, and this year in late October. The flowers are single, delicately mottled with a single column of pale yellow stamens. The petals are ivory with a flush of wine. They usually withstand frost very well. So Camellia salionensis has been used extensively in breeding but it's really kind of unfortunate that it's not readily available. I checked. Camellia Forest used to offer it. I thought I saw it on their list a couple years ago, maybe. And then but I checked just yesterday, and they do not have it listed available on their website. And then I checked Nuccio's nursery out in California, and they do have it, although their price list on their website is from 2018. So I just checked that today. I thought to check it today, and so I didn't have a chance to contact them and see if they still have it or not. But it's worth seeking out if you're into that sort of thing. I love it because it's kind of demure, and it makes a handsome small tree. I guess it's just not flouncy or showy enough, for people to be really excited about it. But I love it, and I think so did Elizabeth. I mean, it's still here in her garden. And so maybe I love it so much because it's not a screamer. I kind of like the underdog. So in the 58 years that it's been growing here in her garden, it's reached some sizable proportions. It's about 15 feet tall and maybe about 20 feet wide, maybe even 25. But it's in full sun in amended clay, and it seems to do really well. One thing we have a very tough time with here is Camellia T scale, or T scale for camellias, whichever it is. I can't remember at the moment, but yeah, that's a wicked thing. So every once in a while, going in and thinning those branches and making sure that air can penetrate, or air can come through and sunlight can penetrate that canopy is a good idea to help keep those boogers out of your camellias. So in November, this is another one of my favorites. And actually, I was thinking earlier today that I was kind of an idiot for including this in my talk, because there is nothing that I can tell you about this that Jim Dronenberg and Dan Weil can't tell you, and they can tell you so much more because they are experts about this plant. I mean, they even named their place for this plant. This is Chimonanthus praecox, which is winter sweet. And this is another thing I knew nothing about before starting to work here in Elizabeth Lawrence's garden. It is a large deciduous shrub, and it is by no means a pretty plant. It really is like that awkward teenager, gangly as heck. It's like an octopus on roller skates. It's going 10 directions at once. And it doesn't matter how skillful your pruning is. It's just weird, awkward, and lanky. But there is nothing like it when the flowers begin to open and their fragrance is carried across this garden when the sun is warming the blooms. It is a fragrance that I swear to you, I could shoulder roll in. I just want to roll around in it. And for that alone, I grow 2 of these in my home garden. Now, the more sun, the better. Although I have one that grows in almost full shade in my home garden, and it does flower, although not as heavily. It doesn't seem to mind being in clay soil, but I would venture to say that a bit of good drainage would be most appreciated. And it does have beautiful, beautiful fall color, this glowing, warm yellow. And like I said, if you really want to know about this, talk to Jim and Dan, because they're the experts, not me. But I do believe it was E.A. Bowles who said that if you had room for only 2 shrubs in your garden, this should be one, and perhaps the other. So that's pretty good authority. I mean, but who wouldn't fall in love with a flower like that? The flower is only maybe an inch across, but it's just such a beauty and so fragrant that it just knocks my socks off. So December is the month that I start looking for Galanthus elwesii, or Elwes's snowdrop. Fill your woodland or any partly sunny to shady area in your garden with these unbelievably easily grown bulbs. Snowdrops require pretty much nothing aside from decently draining soil that doesn't bake to a crisp in the summer. And by decently draining, in my experience, I mean avoid heavily compacted clay. There are several different types of galanthus. Oh my gosh, there are so many different kinds. But I find Galanthus elwesii, or the giant snowdrop, or Elwes's snowdrop, I find this one to be the easiest in cultivation. And with so many different types, you can actually have Galanthus in bloom from October through March. And I can usually find elwesii beginning to bloom in November or December. But I have to say, I think I start looking for it in December, but then I think for us, like the it month is maybe January. But no matter. I still included it here in December. I love it. The best attributes is that critters don't eat them. They don't eat them from above. They don't eat them from below. And they bloom regardless of temperature. Honeybees adore them. And that's a good thing to be aware of, that early flying honeybees, or on warm days when honeybees are venturing out, it is kind of vital to have something that will be in bloom for them to enjoy and gather some pollen and nectar. And they do. I do see them buzzing around these a lot, which is nice. They'll brighten your garden and they'll brighten your day. They're packed with pollinator goodness and just plain old joy. And if you go to Montrose Garden in Hillsborough, North Carolina in November, you'll find a variety of Galanthus elwesii blooming throughout the woods there. It is a magical sight, and it's a wonderful garden to visit any time of the year. So I highly encourage you all to make the trip. Look at this sheet of Galanthus. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I'm just really, I'm having a moment. That just makes me so happy. I can't even stand it. I love it. This encourages me to take all of my clumps of this bulb in my home garden and just divide the heck out of them and just start making sheets of them. So if you guys make the trip down to Hillsborough, come on down to Charlotte and see me as well. I'd love to see you here in the garden. So as the calendar year comes to a close, we're here in December. I get really excited for the strawberry tree, Arbutus unido compacta. That's it right there. This large evergreen shrub is not known for growing very well in Charlotte, but the one here in Elizabeth's garden is thriving, all thanks to Lindy Wilson. Thank you, Lindy, for restoring this plant to the garden. And it's been here for, I am guessing it may be the past 20 years. You can correct me later if I'm wrong, but it's such an awesome plant, and it's definitely beautiful in all seasons for sure. It's kind of a tortured looking thing. It's what we call sculptural. And it's got this rough sort of cinnamon colored fissured bark that's attractive all the year round. But the thing that makes it a real standout is its spectacular bloom and fruit combo show, which is really interesting. I don't know of any other plant at the moment. I can't think of any other plant that has its current year's bloom and its current year's fruit on and making a show at exactly the same time. Flowers are clusters of tiny upside down milk bottles. It looks a bit like a pieris. The flower clusters look a bit like pieris. But unlike pieris, last year's fruit begins to color during the current year's bloom, like I'd said, and giving it its common name of strawberry tree because they really look like strawberries. Fruits put on quite a show. They start out green and then they go to yellow, and then to orange, and then finally red. So its specific epithet of unido comes from the Latin unum edo, which means you eat only one. And I have to tell you, people, I 100% concur. You only will eat one. I know that birds do go for them, although I am ashamed to say that I have neglected to notice which birds go for them. And over the past 12 plus years, I've only had a handful of seedlings show up. So perhaps the birds only eat one as well. Who knows? But strawberry tree requires light soil with good drainage that's not too dry and full sun. It's supposed to be hardy in zones 7 to 9. But like I said earlier, you never know what a plant will do for you until you give it a proper go. And besides, you all know that plants don't read the books, they don't read the internet, and they don't even read their own tags. So they, don't trust them. Trust the plant, but don't trust the tags or the internet or the books sometimes until you grow it for yourself. So now that we've come to the end of the calendar year, I want to leave you with just a few words of wisdom from Elizabeth Lawrence. We should not be too sure that desirable plants will not grow in the South until we have given them a fair trial. Many plants that fail do so not because of the hot weather, but because they're not watered and not planted in a soil with sufficient humus. In the past 12 plus years, like I'd said, that I've been here, I've learned so much from Elizabeth Lawrence. And she inspires me every single day to keep my eyes open for the magic that's just outside my own door. And I know that there's so much more to learn, which means that there's so much more inspiration waiting to be discovered as well. So I hope you've found some inspiration here this evening. And I feel like I have rushed through talking about these plants. But I want you to come and visit, and if you're in the area, and I thank you so much. And I'm throw it open to people if they want to ask any questions.
That is such an inspiring talk, Andrea. Thank you.
Good.
I'd like to ask that if you are on, to unmute and ask your question. And if you need help unmuting, just put something in the chat and I will help you unmute. Lindy and Marianne were chatty earlier. I'm hoping y'all will ask questions. Doug almost always has questions, and I know Jim does as well. Lana, you've got your picture on. Did you want to ask a question? Looks like you do.
No, I just like to say hi. So I put my picture on and say thank you. I mean, I can't imagine distilling my favorites down to one per month. I'm sort of overwhelmed at your list and trying to think it through. So thank you for doing that. I took a few snapshots. I'm going to have to go back and think about, because many of them are plants I don't grow. So awesome.
All right, great. Yeah, it's it's such an interesting thing to work in a garden that for Elizabeth, it was always changing. She was always testing things out. And I came into this job doing that same thing. I mean, I felt like I knew so many plants when I got the job. And then I started working here and I realized I didn't know anything. There's so many more plants that Elizabeth opened my eyes to that are not only garden worthy, wonderful plants, but just things that are great and aren't available anymore. And it's a shame. And I really enjoy propagating. I'm glad that Jim mentioned that I really enjoy propagating. I love it. First of all, I think I just love making new plants. I love sharing plants. But, what I find, especially as I've gotten into the historic preservation part of my job, is that many of these old plants that are original to Elizabeth here, even if there's a plant that's on the market under the same name, it's really not the same as what her plant is here in the garden. And I don't know if that's like across the board with everything, if it's, if things change, if they got, if their sources nowadays are different than they were back in her time. But I just feel like, the act of sharing from gardener to gardener is such an important thing. And I think we are kind of our own best cheerleaders and best teachers in a way, that we can share with each other what we've learned and what we grow, and maybe what died for us, like every single witch hazel that I've ever tried. I mean, and I sometimes have trouble admitting that, I kill a lot of plants. But then as I've looked through Elizabeth's research and her notes and those index cards, she killed a lot of plants too. So that makes me feel just fine. Like it happens, So and I think that J.C. Ralston had a good saying that, if you're not killing plants, you're not gardening hard enough.
Thank you for that.
I would like to
Yeah.
chip in that Elizabeth Lawrence was a prolific writer. You can find a lot of her books, even though they are somewhat out of print. If you go to the library used bookstores, people are always donating them. And if you're truly desperate, give me a yell, because I when I see them, I get them to be able to spread them around. What with I hesitate to say climate change, because I just looked up a 1960s zone map and we appear to be exactly where we were then, but climate is really moving north. What Elizabeth Lawrence wrote about 50 years ago works for us today. I've been proving that for the past 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
So everything, with the exception of Arbutus oneida, which I have killed 4 times, it does not like our winter.
Yeah.
The one time it worked for me was when I planted it directly over a French drain. And even then a bad winter took it out.
Yeah.
But she always apologized for her garden being an experiment rather than, I guess you'd call it a pretty garden.
Right.
It was all she was more interested in the results than the effects.
Right.
But the Elizabeth Lawrence garden is worth it. And since Andrea has been fool enough to mention her own garden, you might be able to weasel a tour there too.
I grow a lot of champion weeds in my own garden.
Don't forget your prize-winning copperheads.
Right, that is true. There is that too.
Wow.
Yeah. We're trying to take those out. We're trying to take those out 2 at a time in our garden. But yeah, it's just interesting.
So that anymore it's thanks for the memory.
Ah, nice.
Her garden was possibly not supposed to be a pretty garden, but Andrea's made it one. It's gorgeous.
Oh.
I love
Well,
it.
I think it was a pretty garden for her as well. And I think that, I mean, part of what I keep trying to almost force on people, I feel like I'm forcing it on people, but I think it's a good thing to do. I try to remind people that this is a really honest garden. This garden was a place where things were being tested out. So at any time of the year, much of it looks very nice, but there might be some parts that don't look so nice. And that's, I'm still using the garden as she intended, as a place to test things out. Granted, 9 times out of 10, dang it, every time I think I'm bringing something brand new into her garden, I go back through her records and I'm like, oh, bested again. Like she grew so much that, that I thought, I think surely she didn't grow this. And then boom, yep, of course she did. She had it in her garden in 1956. Like, why would I expect anything different? But that being said, it's, I remind people it's an honest garden. So it's, chances are if they come here and they see a plant that's doing well, chances are actually pretty good that it's going to do well for them. But, if you're seeing a plant that maybe isn't doing well, chances still might be good that it might do well for you too. I mean, I just encourage people to just keep trying because you just never know. You never know.
I have a question. What years was she active in the garden?
So Elizabeth built the house and designed the garden in between 1948 and moved in 1949, and then sold the property and moved away in 84. So she was here for about 35 years.
Okay. And then so in maintaining this garden in her memory, are you required to plant things that were available during that time period, or can you go out of those boundaries?
I can go any direction I want out of those bounds. But I have to say, the more that I've studied her, I think that the structural plantings, many of the structural plantings are still original to her. And I think that's important to know. And many of the plants that are still here that are original to her were planted pretty early on. Many of them were planted in 1949, 1950. And then, a smattering of some throughout the rest of her time here. But really, I mean, we still have plants. We still have some perennials that are original to her, bulbs that are original to her. And that's all 100% thanks to Lindy Wilson, who I have to say, and it gets me every time to think about this, but Lindy was an incredible steward of this property. And she owned the property as her own home and garden for almost 23 years. And it is entirely due to her incredible stewardship that this historic garden is here, that these plants are here and they're still thriving. And sorry, it means so much to me that that Lindy did all that she did and that she continues to be involved in the property. I can't even express to you guys how incredible that is. There's a lot of institutional knowledge, and Lindy's such a big part of the historic narrative of this property and will always be. So I'm like, we all owe Lindy such a huge debt of gratitude for her work and her time here.
Andrea, I have a.
Lindy, do you want to? Lindy, do you want to share a little bit about what your goals were when you owned and managed the property?
Lindy?
Don't worry about it.
She's so cute. She always tells me, oh, anybody would have done the same thing. Every time she says it, I'm like, all right, you're nuts. No, not everybody would have done the same thing. They would have made it their own.
Hey, Andrea,
Yeah.
not to bring up an unpleasant subject, but what are the impacts you've noticed from the death and destruction going on next door?
So we've had a lot of drainage issues over the past year, and hopefully those issues are now taken care of with some drainage being rerouted, not all to this property, which was supposed to happen to begin with, but somehow that word didn't get down to the people actually doing the work on the property. But so now hopefully we've got it straightened out. As things go, I don't think that we aren't seeing an immediate decline in plants. but I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we may well see some decline.
Describe what's going on next door. Not everyone knows.
Oh,
What you have.
sorry. So the property just next to Elizabeth Lawrence's was her sister's property. The houses were, her sister's house was built just a year to a year and a half, maybe before hers. And just in the last couple of years, that property was, long story short, sort of the Elizabeth Lawrence's niece and nephew were the remaindermen for the estate of the person who most recently lived there. So they got the property, they inherited the property, and so ended up selling it. But before they sold the property, we worked with a local organization to place a conservation easement on that property, because on the shared property line, there are many original plantings, structural plantings. And in the early days of the two properties, they were like joined at the hip. And in the very early days, the gardens ran together a bit. Although her sister's property, the backyard was mostly lawn because she was married and had 2 kids and they needed a place to play. But it's an uphill property. It's on the east side. So I was really worried about, sunlight, airflow, drainage. So that's why we worked with another organization to place a conservation easement on that property, even though that one's not historically significant per se. So the new owners were highly restricted in what they could do and plant, and the size of the house, the height of the house, and the location of the house on the lot, et cetera, et cetera. But as things go in terms of development, it's very different. It's a much larger house than what was there. And, it got the property got fairly well regraded. And so there are a lot of changes, which, it happens, change happens. But yeah, so I don't think that we'll see the full effect of everything until at least 3 to 5 years down the road. But I have to say the new owners are lovely people, and they've been very good to deal with. So I don't know what else to say about that. It's tough. It's a tough thing. Change is a tough thing. So, but this property is a very small, like I said, it's 1/3 of an acre. It's 70 feet by 225 feet, 70 feet wide, 225 feet deep. So a lot of what in Elizabeth's time, what she looked out at was a lot of it was borrowed landscape. And now that borrowed landscape has rapidly gone away. So the garden continues to change regardless, of the plantings within, but also considering the plantings without, the around the boundaries of the property. So we're doing the best that we can to manage and, try to keep everybody aware that we've got a historic property here to manage, and we're doing our best with that. So, but it's still amazing. It's still a magical place to be and to see in all seasons. So,
well,
If
it's so
people would like to
wonderful
see-
to hear the history and where the challenges are currently, and the flexibility that you have with the garden. I really appreciate your taking time to talk with us this evening.
sure.
Jim, Dan, do you all have any closing thoughts?
No, although Dan has something.
If he would like to see a lot more pictures of the garden, I've been there a number of times. If you go to my website, danielwild.com, go to the flora section and scroll down. I think I've got a few, at least a
He's
few
got a
galleries.
gallery of pictures for every time we've been there.
Yeah, I love the place. It has a feel that you can't imagine. So,
Fantastic. And Lana, you have your hand up.
Neil's been waiting to ask something.
Neil.
Hi, I missed most of your talk because I was giving a tour to a neighbor and didn't want to disappoint her. But when you mentioned your joy of propagating a little while ago, it made me wonder if you could give me any hints on propagating camellias, because she had a request to try to propagate a cutting from our camellia,
Mhm.
and I've never done it before. I don't know whether the most effective way is to just cut off some new growth and stick it in a glass of water, or do the air layering technique, which I've read about.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I've had the best luck with air layering.
Okay,
I mean, it takes a longer time, but it's so worth it. Yeah, if you just pay attention to the directions and follow them really closely, and it's really, I was pleasantly surprised. I've done both air layering and striking cuttings, and much better luck with air layering.
good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any particular time of year that's best?
Oh my gosh, I'm thinking that now you've got me on the spot. Let me think. I want to say May, but that might not be right. I'd have to look in my propagation manual.
Okay,
Yeah, I'd have to look that up.
thanks. I've never done it before, but I'm happy to give it a try.
All right, good. I look forward to hearing how that went.
Okay.
Or how it goes. Yeah.
I'll
Well,
just
great.
ask one more thing, because you talked about killing plants, and I have killed a lot. And I often say, when people compliment our garden and say that we're such great gardeners, I say, well, you haven't seen all the things we've killed. And lately I continue year after year to kill hardy hydrangeas, and I mean hardy gardenias,
Gardenias,
because I
yes.
want one so badly.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder if you have any that you think have done well in your area that might work here.
The one gardenia that has done remarkably well for me is Daisy. It's an old Gardenia jasminoides cultivar daisy. That's just, it's done really, really well.
Great, I'll give that a try. Thanks.
Yeah, give it a whirl. And it's different from sort of traditional gardenia, but I love it. It's done great. It's done great. Yeah.
Good.
All right. Well, keep on gardening, keep on trying stuff, always try something new, push your boundaries. And I hope to see you all come through the garden gate here. And I have to give a shout out to Dan. I'm sitting here with a beautiful piece of artwork that Dan did for me of Elizabeth Lawrence at her garden gate.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Right there next to the pruning saw. No, but I look at that every day, and I think about all the wonderful people that I've met because I'm riding some incredible coattails. So thank you. Thanks for
Great.
letting me share with
Thank
you.
you.
Amazing. Thank you.
All right.